Hey guys, I'm Kent and welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to talk about the aRacer products, particularly the RCMini5, but also the RCMini-X, which is, I think, replacing the RCMini5 at this point. The RCMini-X, for the most part, is the same as the RCMini5. It has a faster processor. The interface is also a little bit different, but ultimately a very similar product. So since I have the RCMini5, both in my 2019 Monkey, which I've had now for almost 2 years, I wanted to talk about how to set up all of the parameters correctly, how to go through the auto-tune process, the closed loop process, and get everything running really well on the bike. On the forums, I've seen a lot of questions about how to set up the aRacer. While I've had the RCMini5 for the last couple of years, it's really been in the last couple of months that I've been working with the folks at Riders Block, and they've been showing me how they set them up, that I've really got a better understanding, and I thought that I'd revisit the topic in this video here. I've already done 2 videos on the actual installation on these bikes, so I'll link above and below on how to physically install it in the 2019 Monkey, as well as how to install it in the 2022 Grom. In both of those videos, I also went through a bit of the setup process, but I wanted to do this video end-to-end on how to set it up, go through the auto-tune, and be good to go. So I'll go through the full setup process here on my 2019 Monkey, but the process would be the same on the 22 Grom or any of the other bikes using this product. The other key thing is that if you're buying the RCMini5 or the RCMini-X, you need to also get the wideband sensor. It was the AF1, the new model is called the AF2. So if you're going out to buy these products right now, it's probably the RCMini-X and the AF2 that you're looking to purchase. But the AF1 and the AF2 monitor the air-fuel mixture coming out of the exhaust, and that's the information that it feeds back into the RCMini5 so that you can do auto-tuning and closed loop so it can make adjustments based on how the engine is performing. Without it, honestly, I think the RCMini5 and RCMini-X are pretty useless. There's some predefined maps that you can pull down, but if you're not going to be doing your own tuning, you might as well just get a flash. The auto-tuning feature is what makes these systems really cool. And even after you've got your auto-tune map perfectly done, you still need the AF2 for the closed loop monitoring so that that information is still flowing back into the system so that it can make minor tweaks depending on changes in humidity and temperature and elevation. In some cases, if you're running a big bore kit and high compression, it actually is dangerous to be running without the closed loop monitoring just because it can't make any adjustments and it'll just rely on the auto-tune programming that you did previously. But if the weather or elevation are completely different, that could put you in a really lean situation and bad things can happen. So with that, at this point, I'm going to assume you've already physically installed the RCMini5 or RCMini-X and AF1 or AF2. I'll just call it the RCMini5 and AF1 for now since those are what I have on this bike. All right, let's jump into the programming. So first thing that you need to do is connect the Blink Bluetooth module with your bike. So you'll find that under Settings. Down here, you'll see something called B-Link 3. Select that, it'll connect. I like to have Bluetooth Auto on up here at the top. Under RPM scale, I have it set to up to 10,000. And similarly, target ECU type at the Super 2/Mini 5. Units display, I prefer miles per hour and Fahrenheit, but you can choose something else if you'd like. And there's a couple of different language settings. So now that the RCMini5 is connected to the phone, we want to burn a map to the ECU. So you go under Quick Burn here. Under the maps that are available for this bike, there's a completely stock one, and then there's also this 170cc, it's got a big bore kit and a cam. I've actually found for this bike, this one works better for me, although in most cases I recommend just using the pure stock map. Ultimately, you can get to the same points through the auto-tune. This just has some of those predefined. Click on Go to Flash. Do you want to flash yes? And it starts going. This takes about 10 minutes or so. Be very careful that you don't interrupt this process. I actually have the bike right now on a battery tender just to make sure that it doesn't drop. And then as it gets to 100%, you'll see a reset. The check engine light on the dash is normal. Okay, so first thing we want to do is set the throttle position sensor. So go under Calibration. It's the last item that says TPS Learn. Click on Start Learning. Move the throttle all the way open. Learn complete. Let go. And we go back to this main screen. So under Fuel Base, if you're running the PCX 150 injector, I recommend taking this down to about 85. If you're running the stock injector, I recommend just leaving it at 100%. The auto-tune, again, will make adjustments to get you to about the same place anyway, but this just is a better starting point for the system as it tries to figure everything out. Under target AFR, you'll see 13.3s across the board with about 12.8 and 13.1s at the very top of the RPM range. Those are fine for now. I would leave those for most settings. Although, I guess back to this, if you're running a setup where you're getting particularly hot, you may want to bump these down a little bit to a little bit lower 13s or even high 12s. But again, for most setups, I think the 13.3 is going to be a good target AFR. Other things to work with. So under spark angle, the aRacer RCMini5 comes standard with +3 degrees of timing advance. This is where you can either retard that a bit or make it even more advanced. For the 2019 Monkey and all the dyno work that I did on that, I never found too much advantage of moving that up or down. For the 2022 Grom, I also did some testing on the dyno where we bumped it up a little bit. I have heard since though that there may be some advantage in, particularly in the 7,500 to 8,500 RPM range on that bike, retarding the timing by as much as 3 degrees. I also heard from somebody else that retarding the timing -3 degrees across the board helped pick up some power. So that's something that I'll be checking more on this bike as I do more dyno testing with it. But for the 2019 Monkey and similar to the 2019 and previous generation Groms, I would leave the timing flat for now. Again, this is only really valuable too if you're on a dyno and you can see what the difference is in power that you're making. Idle RPM, this is something that you can make some adjustments to later if you're having trouble keeping a good idle RPM limit. I usually bump this up to 10,000. If you want to go higher than that, I don't recommend going higher than 11,000 RPM without adding more heavy-duty valve springs, or else you're going to get some valve float. But 10,000 is a nice, safe number on this bike. Kind of difficult to get the exact number that I want here. Okay. And then the main activity that we're going to do here is the auto tune. So number 12 here, auto tune. Turn this on. And so what we're doing in auto tune is riding the bike through the entire throttle curve and RPM range so that the bike understands exactly the type of fueling it needs to have to get to those 13.3 or whatever you set as your target AFR. The best way to do this is on a dyno, because on a dyno you can very methodically come up and go down through the throttle at different RPMs so that you're able to have values in every single fuel cell. You need to be able to hold something in a fuel cell for 2 to 3 seconds for it to really save. So if you're going straight to the top of the throttle and riding in a high RPM range, it's not going to collect those data points that you need to be able to ride in the lower RPM range. So this will impact your idling, and I've had this problem before and I've heard others where as it comes down, when you come off the throttle, it gets stuck at like 2 or 3 RPM and bounces there for a while before it comes down. These are all symptoms from a auto tune that you just didn't do very cleanly. So much harder to do the auto tuning when you're riding the bike around on the streets, but the same principle applies, that you're very slowly rolling the throttle on and then off and then more throttle and then off, back and forth until you've gone through, again, the entire RPM range and the entire throttle range. What I've seen on the dyno from the folks at Rider's Block, they end up drawing kind of like an inverse hill that they just trace higher and higher until all that area is filled in. Since I'm not on a dyno today, and I imagine most of you guys aren't either, I'm going to go ahead and show riding around this on the street as I fill out the auto tuning curve. And get this tuned up. Again, the goal is to have pretty slow and methodical throttle control through the whole RPM range. Watching them do it on the dyno looks so much easier because they don't have to start and stop or watch for traffic. can see that it eventually starts erasing some of your older marks as you've built up enough of the new marks. So you won't be able to see all of the history, but so I won't show the entire area being filled out here, but again, it's starting with this area and building it out increasingly until you have greens across the board. And also in every cell that you can move the dot between. You don't have to put a lot of miles on the bike. I'm probably going to spend just 30 minutes going up and down this highway here. So let me finish this up and then we'll get back into my garage. Okay, so back in the garage. It wasn't a very long ride. I probably only spent about 5 miles filling out the auto-tune graph, getting all of the areas for RPM and throttle filled out. And again, it's important that you stay in every cell for 2 to 3 seconds. And when I say cell, I'm referring to the fuel table. So if you go under fuel adjust, you can see this little area that as I move the throttle, it goes from 0 to 100%. And then as you're riding, also it'll show the different RPM bands that you're in. But you can also be looking at this screen while you're doing your auto-tuning to make sure that you're sitting in every single cell for, again, 2 to 3 seconds to make sure you get that good auto-tune. Back to auto-tune. Now that we've got the data in there that we want from that ride that we just did, we turn auto-tune off. And it asks if we want to store the values. Yes, we do. Now that those values are stored, that's what the bike is going to use every time that you ride it. So one of the questions that I often see is, at this point, can I take off the AF1 and the wideband sensor? Do I need it anymore? So technically you don't. You can continue just running the auto-tune map that you just created. The problem with that, and I mentioned this before, is that without monitoring the AFR at this point, changes in humidity or temperature or elevation, the map that you now have stored may not be appropriate for some of those changes. So what I would recommend is that you always, once you turn off auto-tune, go to closed loop and turn that on. What closed loop does is that it uses your map that you built out of auto-tune, but then makes minor adjustments on the fly. All right, so let me fire up the bike. You can see the fuel CL in the bottom right corner of the top metrics. You can see the fuel CL actually changing values. Right now it's giving me negative 2.93. You can also leave auto-tune on all the time. There's not really any harm in doing that. It's just that very methodical process that you go through in the auto-tuning that I just did on the bike. Some of that will get overwritten. Again, my recommendation is to go through a very neat auto-tune process, save it, close it, turn on closed loop, and then that's how you'll continue running the bike. And then some of the other features that are available on the RCMini5. Down here, this speed gain feature, I don't believe this actually works. I've tried to use this a couple of different times as I've made gearing changes, and moving this ratio up and down doesn't seem to do anything for me. Let me know in the comments below if this works for you, if there's a function that I don't understand there. Idle RPM, this is where if you're having trouble with idle, that maybe it's too low, you can actually bump up the idle value here. It'll just provide a little more fueling at that very lowest fuel table. I've always left this at 0. Backfire adjust, this is something that's just fun. You can have the bike backfire at different points in the RPM range. You can change how loud the backfire is. Also, depending on where you are in your throttle position sensor. Have fun messing with this. I've actually always left this off. I still get some pretty good pops in the bike, but this is where if you want to dial that in, you can mess with it in lots of different ways. Something interesting about the RCMini-X that I saw from someone who has it, this is actually now a paid feature. I think it's an extra $5 or $10 to be able to access this portion for that new version of the aRacer. And then the last thing that I'd like to show is how you can customize your main screen. So you can configure the different values in this interface to whatever your preference is. I like my biggest dial here to show me AFR. If you hold down that little widget, you can then choose what you want to see. Also, just of note, AFR isn't AFR in the listing here. It's this AFR underscore WBO2 underscore CAL. That's how you get the actual AFR reading off of the AF1. Engine temperature that I have in the top right corner, That's also pretty important for me. You can also adjust what the range is so that it'll start showing you when you're getting into what you consider the red zone. The bottom right bubble, that's where I have the fuel closed loop, just so that I can see how big of adjustments a closed loop is making. If it starts making really big adjustments all the time, that's an indication that you may want to redo your auto-tune process. I've got battery voltage and the TPS sensor. And then down here on the bottom of the screen, you can shift these little widgets around, and you can also scroll through it so that you can, again, it's got fuel closed loop. I have the GPS speed and altitude based off of data coming directly from my phone. I can't find a way to make that GPS speed read in miles per hour though. That's still pulling kilometers per hour. The gear number function doesn't seem to, well, I know it doesn't work on the Monkey because there's no gear indicator on the Monkey. On my 2022 Grom, it also doesn't seem to do anything, even though that bike does have a gear indicator built into the engine case. But air temperature, voltage, there's lots of other information that's available here, and you can shift these little tiles around so that the top 2 rows show the things that you're most interested in seeing. So hopefully this video was helpful if you're installing an aRacer for the first time, or if you have one and you've been having some problems with idle or that bouncing RPM at 2.5 or 3K that it took me a long time to figure out. Again, I think the crux of it is making sure that you have a good auto-tune session, and it's preferable if you can do it on a dyno, because then you can very methodically control exactly where the throttle is and how much RPM you're running in each gear. But for those of us that don't have access to a dyno, finding a nice, safe, long, straight street is probably a good way to do it. Again, just be really careful. In the segment where I was doing the auto-tuning for this bike, for this video, it was still kind of hairy to try to be watching that screen and the road and paying attention to everything else going on as I try to get that perfect. So again, just be real careful when you're doing that, especially if you're doing it on public roads. I'm also definitely not the expert when it comes to aRacers, or specifically the RCMini5, although I have had a lot of time to work with them and seen other people work with them that I feel like I have a very good understanding. But I'm very interested in everybody else's feedback, other things they recommend doing in setting up their bikes. Any issues that you've had or questions or comments, please leave them below, because it'd be great if this becomes a discussion and I can learn something in the process as well. It's funny, over the last 2 years that I've had this YouTube channel in building these mini bikes, I've honestly learned so much over the course of the videos that I've put together, particularly from the comments that come in and teaching me things that I didn't know. So I really appreciate everybody's engagement on these videos, because it's been a great learning experience for me as well. So again, thank you everybody for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please click that subscribe link below. Stay tuned for more videos and keep on building.